This GeekWire podcast is brought to you by BECU. Stay tuned to the break as Brian Westbrook interviews BECU's Stacy Black for today's money hack about talking with the children and young adults in your life about money. For more money hacks, check out geekwire.com/BECU.
And if that regulatory environment changes and it's a green light to buy up whoever you want without much oversight, then I think it could spark a new wave of M&A activity.
And what that means, ostensibly, is that there are new exit opportunities for successful startups and things that...
And unsuccessful startups.
And unsuccessful startups. Welcome to GeekWire. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop.
And I'm GeekWire co-founder John Cook.
We are coming to you from Seattle, where we get to report each day on what's happening around us in business, technology, and innovation. What happens here matters everywhere, and every week on this show, we talk about some of the most interesting and important stories in the news. John, this week I kind of got a grab bag for you. A bunch of random items. You know, not a very consequential week in the world, so let's just have some fun and talk about some frivolous topics here.
Let's come up with a theme song for GeekWire Podcast, Grab Bag.
Grab Bag. In all seriousness, I think a little later on, I would like to talk a little bit, without going overboard, because I think folks are sick of it, but a little bit about what the Trump administration 2.0 will mean for the technology industry, because there is an interesting angle, I think, on Amazon in particular. And I've got a little bit of inside knowledge from not
inside
from
scoop, huh?
Not really, just a minor insight that I think I can share. So that's coming up later on if you can stand it. But first, hey, I was walking through SeaTac Airport this week. I don't know if you saw this story in this video that I posted on the site. And I've been fascinated by all forms of autonomy and AI. And so I saw this self-driving wheelchair. And without going into my family situation too much, let me just say that based on various relatives in my family, wheelchair service at the airport is something that is very much on my radar. And I will just say, someday I hope to convince my mom to actually use one of these self-driving wheelchairs.
Yes.
However, based on what I saw, I think it's going to be a hard sell. I saw one of these going through the C concourse on its way back to home base.
Was somebody in it?
No one was in it, but I know that it had deposited someone there in the concourse because I saw them going there, and then I followed it when it was going back empty. And I was like, okay, I'll start videoing this thing and see what happens. And turns out I started videoing at just the right moment because it ended up getting stuck, totally stymied by a simple pop-up, a yellow pop-up that was there to warn of a spill in the concourse. And so it was like, it sat there and it kept saying, excuse me, please step aside. Excuse me, please step aside. And it took a human to intervene, not me. I was determined to just stand there and watch it play out. And so I followed up with the airport afterward, and they said, well, basically, for safety reasons, these things follow pre-programmed routes. So if anything gets in its way, including a temporary barrier, it has to stop. And
you're screwed. You miss your flight. Well,
I was thinking about this. I think most people in the wheelchair would have been able to reach out and move the thing aside. Maybe. So that's my adventure in autonomy for the week. And it was kind of a fun little encounter in the airport.
Yeah, not like my awesome Waymo experience in San Francisco.
Exactly.
Where it seemed to work flawlessly.
Exactly. You would think that something a little more simple and low tech would be able to navigate the obstacles.
Now, I don't know if you know the particulars of how this works, but do you put in your gate, or do you speak to it to get? I mean, how do you get there?
The answer is I don't know. And
I knew I was going to stump you.
And I think this is worthy of investigation. I do know they operate from a base inside the airport. So my assumption is that they're programmed from there to go to a specific location as determined by wherever the passenger's gate is. But if my mom would try it, we could find out.
Now, I think your mom needs to do this just for journalistic purposes, right?
Yes, absolutely.
She really needs to participate to be part of the story.
I've tried. I've brought it up. It's a hard sell. She listens to the podcast, so I think we'll find out. We'll see how she feels about me mentioning that she's using a wheelchair.
Next trip, Mrs. Bishop. You're in the wheelchair just for journalism purposes.
All right. Next topic. revisiting something we talked about a couple weeks ago, Uber and Expedia. Do you remember we
went deep.
We went deep on this. But John, you mentioned during that show that you didn't think it was going to happen.
And I'm in good company with other people who also don't think it's going to happen, right?
All right. Here is Expedia chairman Barry Diller speaking on CNBC this week.
Expedia and Uber. Does a tie-up make sense for Uber?
As an industrial combination, sure. But it's not going to happen.
That's
full stop.
So
it's not going to happen.
You're saying it aloud. Okay, that's good that we're getting it from the horse's mouth. We talked to Dara on the broadcast last week.
Yeah.
And he didn't go full on that it was not happening. He just said
it's not going to happen.
If it makes sense, why is it not going to happen?
It's just not going to happen.
Do you think that there's a sense that this company will get acquired or merge with somebody else?
Expedia?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Because?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's in Expedia's interest. Expedia is now beginning a period, I think, of real growth.
Okay.
And is now, for I think the first time in some time, has now got a great leader who's doing every right thing with the company. So I think if ever there's a wrong time for Expedia to actually exchange its shares, it is now. So that is
right.
The big reason.
Tell us,
and the small reason, which is whatever, is I don't want to do it.
Right.
And it's not I don't want to do it because I don't want to do it.
Right.
I don't think that Expedia should be sold, and I have enough shares, voting shares, that I probably can't get anything done, but I can certainly stop something from being done.
I love
just such a great response.
Just the sort of subtle swagger.
Yeah.
It's very old school.
There's some gravitas
there, yes.
to use one of my favorite words.
But yes, just hey, I don't think it's the right thing to do. And basically I control enough shares that it's not going to happen.
End of story. Why are we still talking about this?
Until 2 months from now, when Uber comes in with 25% higher offer than they gave. I mean, that could very well just be a negotiating tactic.
Potentially, but that seems pretty blunt. So it was a pretty blunt no.
I little backstory. I did get to interview Barry Diller once at an Expedia event behind the scenes. I think it was the only reporter there. And the instruction, or the guidance, I should say, from the PR folks in advance was, you will have a better interview if you refer to him as Mr. Diller.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I did.
Leading in a little different way than some of the more modern CEOs.
All right. So there you have it. Expedia and Uber.
Nothing else to talk about, right?
That's right.
Not happening. Okay. I was right, I bet, basically.
Okay, let's take a quick break here. And coming up next, we'll give a little preview of some of the things that are coming up at GeekWire. This GeekWire podcast is brought to you by BECU. Stay tuned as Brian Westbrook interviews BECU's Stacy Black for today's Money Hack about talking with the children and young adults in your life about money. And for more money hacks, check out geekwire.com/BECU.
Why is it important to talk to children and young adults about their financial goals? I'm Brian Westbrook. In Money Hacks, presented by BECU, we'll talk about what parents can do to help educate their children. And Stacy Black is the lead financial educator for BECU. What tips would you have for parents?
I would say start early, and it's never early enough. The sooner we get started, the more we're going to position our children for bright financial futures. So having those conversations, being open, honest, just talking through everyday spending and finances with our kids is important.
It's important for them to know that just because you can walk up to an ATM, that doesn't mean there's an unlimited supply of cash.
Yep. It's not free money, which I thought it was.
Ryan, I'm learning a lot. Well, you can learn a lot more on this episode of Money Hacks. Check out geekwire.com/BECU. I'm Brian Westbrook.
Listen to the full interview and find more episodes of Money Hacks at geekwire.com/BECU and find more information at becu.org. Next topic, John, let's talk a little bit about GeekWire. We've got the GeekWire Gala coming up on December 12th. This is something we've been doing, now for 14 years, 13 years?
A lot of years.
Yeah, this is a long time GeekWire tradition. It's our annual holiday party. The pitch is, hey, if you're in the Seattle tech market, you want to be there because everybody else is there. And the idea is that if you're a startup and you don't want to have your own holiday party, make our gala your holiday party.
Great pitch, Todd.
Thank you.
Are you coming out?
Yeah.
You got a special
kidding me?
outfit planned?
I always do. I always do. And I'll come up with something this
You're
year.
always surprised. Yeah.
Yes.
We'll have our fierce fashion contest. So maybe you can apply this year.
Nah, I'm not going to apply for fierce fashion, but hey, I'll try and live up to the standards of some of the past winners of those contests.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of action in store. The Fierce Fashion Contest. We've got caricatures. We got a karaoke lounge. We got a Candyland theme. We've got a lot going on. It's going to be a fun party.
Our events team is going all out, as they usually do. The other part of this program that I really like is the recognition of the uncommon thinkers. This is supported through a partnership with Greater Seattle Partners here in the Seattle region. And I loved this last year. We go through a process where we pick, with community nominations and a panel of judges, 5 people who think differently and are accomplishing big things. And GeekWire reporters, including myself, get to profile all of them. And so you'll be seeing them on the pages of GeekWire in the weeks ahead, and then they will be honored at a special reception in advance of the gala. So this is something that I really enjoy. In fact, last year, I got to interview each of the uncommon thinkers for the GeekWire podcast. And I have to say, it was one of the best for me and most inspiring podcasts of the year, because you've got these big brains coming in and sharing how they think and what's next and what's on their agenda. So
yeah, well, we hope you'll do that again, Todd, as a special episode of the podcast coming up in December. But the cool thing about this too is it really showcases the power of the innovation ecosystem in the Seattle area, spanning everything from aerospace to AI to healthcare and medical technologies. So it's a real diversity of folks that we'll be recognizing and honoring this year.
And then just looking a little bit farther ahead, some of you may have noticed we have a special series that's rolling out on GeekWire called Microsoft at 50, recognizing Microsoft's 50th anniversary, which is in April of 2025. We're getting out ahead of it a little bit. And as part of that, we're going to be having an event, Microsoft at 50. And this is supported by our partners at Accenture, who are underwriting this particular series and event. And we'll be having some special podcasts related to this. I've been really having a lot of fun with this, reconnecting with folks and telling the story of Microsoft's history through more of a modern lens.
So Todd, where should people go if they want to get tickets to these 2 great events coming up? The GeekWire Gala on December 12th and Microsoft at 50 on March 20th.
GeekWire.com/events.
That's the easiest place to go.
All right. So GeekWire.com/events. I'll also link to some of our Microsoft coverage. And of course, check the site over the coming weeks in advance of the gala for the Uncommon Thinkers series.
So Todd, as part of the Microsoft at 50 editorial series that you've been working on, you've been interviewing a lot of interesting people.
Yes.
From Nathan Myhrvold to Peter Lee at Microsoft Research. I'm curious, and maybe this is teasing ahead too much, but is there an interview or an anecdote or a little story that has popped out? Because I think people like hearing kind of this behind the scenes of your reporting.
I can tell you that there is a story idea that I've come up with that I hope to pursue, and maybe based on the feedback to this conversation, I might get some confirmation from the GeekWire podcast audience that this would be interesting. There's the story of Microsoft in mobile, and I think it's pretty well known. And one of the things I've been trying to do is go back and tell things with a different lens, not just tell the same old stories, but look at them in a new way. And one of my ideas is to not tell the Windows Phone story specifically, but instead to tell the Microsoft mobile story through the lens of Zune, the failed music player that Microsoft attempted to deploy and did launch in competition with the iPod at the time.
Okay, I'm not quite tracking you here.
So that was in some ways the roots of Microsoft's struggles in the mobile market. And I think, to me, people loved their Zune. There was a guy who got a Zune tattoo. I was thinking about going back and trying to find the guy who got the Zune tattoo as part of this series. It's just kind of rich with characters and interesting stories.
But what's the tie between Zune and the phone? I'm not getting it.
It's a mobile device. that represented Microsoft's first attempt to challenge Apple in mobile devices. Remember, before the iPhone, there was the iPod. And if not for the iPod, there probably would not have been the iPhone. And here you had Microsoft's first opportunity to head off Apple in this market for devices that we carry around in our pocket. And they failed. Why did they fail? And how did that end up leading to their broader failure in the much more important smartphone market? It's just an idea I'm tossing around.
Well, I think this is a good opportunity because we have a lot of current Microsoft employees who listen and a lot of former Microsoft employees who listen to the GeekWire podcast. Why don't you email your story ideas to us, tips@geekwire.com. If you have a unique story about Microsoft, their history, where they're going, or angles that you think would be of interest.
That's right. And just so people know the focus, the idea is to use a historical lens to understand how Microsoft got to where it is today and where it's going next. So that is sort of my premise.
Right. It's not a pure history. Yeah.
It has to be something that's relevant or at least has relevant lessons.
So your first story was looking at AI and how Microsoft got into the AI business and presenting that with a forward-looking lens.
And in the same way, the next story is going to be about Microsoft as a startup, what it was like from the time frame of 1975 to 1986 when they IPO'd, but through the lens of how investors would look at the company today, funding, founders, product market fit, some of the same sorts of measures that we use for startups today, and what made Microsoft work and whether there's any lessons that startups could take from it today. So in each of these stories—
Looking forward to that one.
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be a great one.
I had a great interview with Microsoft's first investor, David Marquardt.
I was going to say, was that August Capital?
Yes, he is currently with August Capital.
Okay.
But back then it was named something else. And
it was?
Yes.
It was. This is a good trivia question for folks to—
Well, here, let me call
I thought it was always August Capital, even back in the 70s, I guess, when the first investment
This is what I love. So I have 42 sources on this one story in Notebook LM. So I can tell you probably within about 2 seconds. In other words, I've got interviews.
Let me do a Google search to race you.
Okay. What was the name of the venture capital firm that invested in Microsoft? And David Marquardt, to your point, and it's thinking here, but David Marquardt, Technology Venture Investors, TVI. That was the first one. And it was...
Yeah, TVI. Yep, that's what I'm coming up with.
And David Marquardt, who was a Microsoft board member then for more than 30 years. And you interviewed
him.
I interviewed him.
Oh, I can't wait to... Yeah. Just hearing his perspective on things will be fascinating.
It was amazing. And the fascinating thing, too, was there's a legendary anecdote about how he basically won Bill Gates over at a University of Washington football game. And I got him to tell that story. And I'll save it. I'll save it for the story. That's a good it's a good teaser.
Yeah.
So, check that out next week. We'll have a little more on that on the podcast.
It's coming up.
Next week is coming up. Yeah.
Great. Can't wait to read it.
Yeah. All right. Coming up next, let's talk about the unavoidable topic of the week. I want to get a little bit into what the new Trump administration will mean for technology and specifically for Amazon. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop with John Cook. We're rounding up the week's news, and it's hard to talk about this week without talking about some of the changes on the political landscape. And one of the interesting things that is emerging now from the Trump administration 2.0, the new incarnation, Trump 47, is the question of what will happen to the regulatory environment. And one of my key takeaways from this whole thing is it's actually kind of uncertain from a lot of the people I've talked to and the coverage that I read. It's very hard to predict exactly how a new Trump administration will approach tech regulation, and it might even be a little bit random and idiosyncratic, if I could say that. But have you been tracking some of the coverage of this, John?
No, not really. I'm basically tuned out.
Basically gone into your Premier League.
I'm
bubble.
spending a lot of time listening to English Premier League fantasy podcasts.
It's funny, because my escape, I hear what you're saying. It is.
And if anybody needs any tips or recommendations on those, just reach me at john@geekwire.com. I've got a slew of them I'm going through.
It's funny because I love the Survivor podcast with Jeff Probst, the official Survivor podcast on Fire. And I made a point this week of catching up on not only the Survivor TV episodes that I had missed with my family over the past few weeks, but also on that podcast. Although, there's so many themes in that are so cutthroat. Although soccer, too, that's a competition, but at least it's an escape.
Yes. Anyway, let's get back to deal making under the Trump administration. And what's going to happen?
Well, you've got two things going on here. You've got the M&A regulatory environment and the assumption that perhaps there might be more of an opportunity for tech companies to make acquisitions. So that's on the one side. But for me, one of the more interesting parts is the assumption that Lina Khan will no longer be overseeing the FTC. I think we can safely make that assumption.
Although J.D. Vance was a supporter of hers, so do we know this to be the case?
From what I've heard, her support of Democratic candidates probably rules her out for that post in the future. But hey, that is not my area of expertise. What I've heard is that under the FTC with Lina Khan as chair, there was zero chance of any kind of settlement with Amazon in the FTC's antitrust lawsuit against the company. Like, that thing was going to trial. And there's at least the possibility for Amazon under some new administration that there might be a willingness to negotiate some kind of settlement. Now, that doesn't mean that a settlement's going to happen, but it means that it's at least in the realm of possibility.
Well, what about the possibility that it just goes away?
Well, that would, I guess, have to require a dismissal, or I don't know. That seems to me unlikely, in part because even with the recent overtures by Jeff Bezos to Trump in a variety of forms on Twitter and via the Washington Post, I guess. And gosh,
what is Elon whispering in Trump's ear?
Exactly. So I don't know. Trump historically has not had a positive outlook on Amazon, especially when you think about things like, you remember the Jedi contract?
Yeah.
Where there were allegations that Trump specifically jumped in and made sure that didn't go to Amazon. I'm trying to remember all the details of that. But I don't think that Trump would be inclined, absent some new influence or new piece of data or something on his own, to do something especially friendly toward Amazon just by default. That's my sense of it.
Of the tech giants, I would think Amazon is probably the least liked by Trump.
I think you're probably right. You're right. So
that's not a great position to be in.
It's not.
Frankly, everything is in flux in terms of who runs the government, who controls what, who's appointing who are the people that are actually going to be in government as regulators. I think it's all up in the air.
I think you're absolutely right.
So typically, the business world doesn't like that sort of uncertainty, and that causes challenges. If you have uncertainty in what's going to happen, although the market's performed really well, there is an inclination that this will be a much lighter regulation environment, which would lead to companies having more ability to operate freely and potentially acquire other companies.
Right.
Which under the Biden administration, I think there was a real reticence by at least the big tech companies to do anything that would draw attention to themselves. And I think this is one of the reasons why you saw OpenAI get a massive investment, and it's this credits with, Azure credits, and it wasn't a straight like, we're buying OpenAI, because I don't think they could have done it in that environment. Maybe they wouldn't want to anyway.
Not to go down that rabbit hole, but I don't think Microsoft necessarily would have acquired OpenAI. I think it's more in the realm of Inflection AI and others along those lines, where Microsoft did those kinds of dual deals where they did a $650 million business arrangement at the same time they brought in Mustafa Suleyman as the Microsoft AI CEO.
Yeah, ostensibly it was an acquisition without doing an acquisition. And
I don't know that an OpenAI acquisition would have happened anyway,
well, I guess my larger point is that I think you saw from at least the big tech companies very little interest in even approaching any sort of acquisitions over the last 4 years.
Yes.
And they're sitting on mountains of cash. At least these big tech companies are. And so you would think that they could start to gobble up some of these other companies. There was a reason why they were deciding not to do that. And if that regulatory environment changes and it's a green light to buy up whoever you want without much oversight, then I think it could spark a new wave of M&A activity.
At the very least, I think you're going to see some companies test the waters once the new administration and some of the new regulatory chiefs are in place to see if things are more amenable to M&A.
Which has been in the tank for the last few years.
Yes.
It's been pretty tough going. So,
and what that means ostensibly is that there are new exit opportunities for successful startups and things that...
And unsuccessful startups.
And unsuccessful startups.
that need to unload themselves to someone.
There you go. Larger startups, I guess. All right. That's as far down that rabbit hole as I want to go.
Sounds good, Todd.
Back to Premier League and Survivor.
Yes. Big weekend here for Premier League.
Is it?
Well, every weekend is this time of year.
All right. Well, enjoy. Thanks for listening, everybody. Until next time, I'm Todd Bishop.
And I'm John Cook.
We'll talk to you next week on the GeekWire Podcast.